Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to On Your Mental. This is the podcast that shares candid, open, and sometimes vulnerable conversations between and about men. My appearance has obviously changed. I'm rocking a mustache today, but there's a reason why. Today is the first episode of a series of episodes this month dedicated to Movember. This episode in particular is special because we're joined by Mitch Hermansen, who works with Movember, kind enough to take the time out of the day to come and join us here for some conversations around men's mental health. We're also joined by my friend Devin. Devin and I have raised money together in the past for Movember, and that's why we're rocking the stashes. So you'll see in this episode, everybody's got a mustache on. Next week's episode, this is going to be gone, clean shaven, because that'll be starting November 1st. Today, when this was filmed, is October 25th. So I get to have some facial hair for a little bit more. But anyways, it's a great episode. I hope you all enjoy today's conversation, and I hope that you learn something about Movember and men's mental health. If you're interested at all in donating to Movember, it's a great cause, and throughout this conversation, you'll hear more about it. But if you're interested in donating, there's going to be a link in the description to my page, which is going to be the page for fundraising for On Your Mental. So I'll see y'all in a moment when the episode starts. Enjoy. Peace.
I appreciate that you're a big Pokemon fan.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I didn't have like anything else to fill like the space.
Right.
So I just started throwing random things around. It will get better with time.
You know, the room would feel empty without that Gengar.
That's what I thought.
It really completes it, right?
The Umbreon, the Bulbasaur. No, you gotta have something around there. First of all, welcome Devin, welcome Mitch. This is it. I'll start off by saying I'm very excited about this episode. I've been talking about it with Kabir all week. I've been planning this out for a while. When I started the podcast, I thought in my head, like, it'd be sick to one day do anything with Movember. And then today, we have Mitch here from Movember joining us on the podcast. So welcome, Mitch. Welcome, Devin. Devin's a friend of mine. You and I have both raised money for Movember in the past.
Yep.
I've gone for 5 years myself. I don't know about you, but...
Did it the 1 year with you.
Just the...
Yeah.
All right. Rookie numbers.
Quality over quantity, you know?
There you go. Yeah,
we
it was
raised
a good year.
Yeah,
it was a good year.
Great year.
It was a good year. And then Mitch from Movember.
Yeah.
So I wanted to maybe start off the episode by asking you a little bit about what you do with Movember.
Sure.
For the audience, for us, because we don't know either. But yeah, I'll lend it to you there. What brought you to Movember? And why Movember?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a hairy journey, if you will.
Oh,
So the mustache puns are starting. So I'm based here in Vancouver. I've been with Movember. This is my 8th campaign.
Oh, wow.
With them,
Wow.
which is wild. Time flies.
Mm-hmm.
I head up our fundraising and business development across the country, basically making sure everyone that does Movember is having a great time. They know where the money's going, feel appreciated, and want to come back and do it again year after year.
That's cool.
That's kind of what my team and I do. Yeah, you don't normally go to school for like mustache farming. So
No, yeah.
Unfortunately not.
It's always,
no.
yeah.
Not yet.
Unfortunately not. So my career actually started in accounting. So I'm a chartered accountant by trade. Worked at KPMG for 4 years. That's where I started my career. And that's how I kind of got involved with Movember. So I ran Movember internally there, originally just for fun. I discovered, it's a super fun thing to do in a workplace, brings people together, breaks down barriers. Like you get a partner growing a crappy mustache and with a junior guy, it's great. And then they added the mental health side of Movember, which, for me, certainly, resonates with my family. Both my grandfathers really struggled. I lost one of my dad's dad to suicide, actually. So it was something, always within my family that was, an issue close to home. And then as I've gone through Movember, I learned more about that and appreciate it more. And so that was the personal connection there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then, turns out 2 years later, Movember reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to join the team, and it's been a great time ever since. So.
Wow, that would be a very strong connection that would pull you into wanting to work with Movember then too, right? I'm sorry to hear that about your grandfather, but
yeah, I mean, thank you. And it's a sad story. Unfortunately, as I'm sure we'll dig into. It's not an uncommon story, and it's one that certainly trying to spread more awareness around and raise funds for those programs for guys that might be going through a tough time. So. Yeah.
We all need support. Definitely need support.
It's true.
So you've been with them for 8 campaigns now. This is your 8th campaign with Movember. This is the 15th in Canada.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, at least, is the 15th campaign.
That is correct.
In Canada.
Yeah.
So what's that like? Is it like obviously this is a busy time for you too, like getting ready for this today for everybody watching and listening. This is the 25th of October. So 1 week away.
Yeah.
1 week away from starting up.
Yeah. So for our team, I would say the busiest time of Mova for my year is actually September, October. The
prep.
The lead up. That's definitely the craziest time. And then November is still busy, but it's less stressful. It's more fun. You're kind of going with the flow and get to enjoy it a bit more. But it's always the prep. But yeah, so this is the 15th year in Canada, it was pretty wild. And I think a lot of people know Movember for the mustache. And fundraiser maybe for prostate cancer and more so now for the mental health side. But a lot of people, I'd say I get 2 main questions when I tell people I work at Movember. One, do you rock that duster 365 days a year? And the answer is yes. I train all year round, but I will shave it off on November 1st.
Oh, so you do start fresh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll start fresh, and then I'll grow a new one for the month of November. And then the second question, I often get is like, how did Movember begin? Like, what's the deal with like mustaches? What does that have to do with anything? And I think I'll quickly share the story of Movember, and because it started in 2003,
and it was in Australia, no?
Started in Australia to a couple friends, having a few drinks at a bar on a Sunday afternoon, 2 friends, and one of the guys. They're like, what goes out of fashion, like comes into fashion, like what could we potentially bring back? They're like, the mustache, like why not bring the mustache? And so they took out a napkin, started writing out 30 of their friends' names down, and then came up with this idea where you grow a mustache for a whole month, 30 days and 30 nights, and there's 3 rules. Gotta start clean shaven, gotta grow a mustache, no beards, no goatees allowed, and the third was you celebrate with a huge party at the end. And so that's what they did. They called it Movember. They had an absolute blast and had a party at the end.
Tell me more about this party.
Yeah.
Well, you dressed up in costumes, actually. There's actually is more if you really want to know.
Are you being serious?
They dressed up in costumes to match their mustache. So there's lumberjacks and police officers. And
That's sick.
Yeah. So it was a great time. But honestly, that's all it was. Movember was not a charity. It didn't start out as anything. It was literally just kind of cool, like a great idea, a fun thing to do between 30 friends.
But then it started conversations.
Exactly.
Right? So, you started asking, why the hell are you growing that thing?
Yeah, they're like, did you forget to wash your face this morning? What is that thing on your face? Like, girlfriends are mad, wives are upset. And so the guys knew they were onto a good idea. And, they were inspired by the pink ribbon, everything that I'd done for breast cancer, women's health, and looked at men's health. There was nothing being done. Originally, the prostate cancer was like the male equivalent. So they said, perfect, we'll marry the mustache and prostate cancer, and came up with our tagline, which is changing the face of men's health, which, you grow a mustache, you change your face, you look like Justin Bieber or Tom Selleck, depending how good of a stash. You guys all have great mustaches. So.
For the time being. Clean soon.
But changing the face of men's health, when you think about it, eloquently describes actually the outcome we're trying to achieve as a men's health charity, a movement, getting guys to change their attitudes, go to the doctors early, mental health, like open up, talk about stuff, going through a tough time. And so fast forward to today, now we're in 30 countries. I've raised over $1 billion for men's health.
No shit,
Really?
really?
$1
billion, yeah, B.
Wow.
That's
With a B.
With a B.
Yeah, and 1,300 men's health projects, and
That's
about
wild.
a quarter of those here in Canada. We'll probably get into some of those later, but yeah. So it's been an amazing organization and really changed the game. Like when prostate cancer advanced in the past 6 years, in the past 10 years, probably advanced what previously would have taken like 60 or 70 years because there was nothing really being done before. So now we'll have dads and grandfathers alive. Never will be. That wouldn't have been without, the support.
That's so true, man. That's such
that's
a
amazing.
heavy
It's
impact.
super cool. It's super rad. I would say on the mental health side, that is where, we could say we're kind of losing the battle and where we need extra attention. So that's kind of where we're headed now.
And I mean, that's the thing that drew me to Movember, right? I've only been raising money for the last 5 years, but for me, it was around mental health. I won't get into it too much right now, but it's something that my friends and I do share in common as far as an experience goes, is we did lose a friend to suicide as well. And that was in 2016. So that was the year that I started fundraising for Movember, and it just kind of coincided. It was like, that was a big wake up call that this is something that young people deal with, right? Depression is not very well understood. There are other mental illnesses that contribute to things like that decision to take your own life. So I found it very moving and a compelling reason to find a charity or a cause to support that supports young men who are in situations where they might make that decision. Right. So for me, it was mental health that brought me to this. And I think that is a good way to open up this conversation to the rest of us now. So thank you first, Mitch, for sharing all this about Movember.
Thank you.
Giving us some backstory here. The thing that is interesting about dates and everything around Movember is that they added mental health and suicide prevention as a cause area in 2013. Correct me if I'm wrong, but 2013 I think was the year. And then that also happens to be the year where the DSM-5 got updated, and that's something that I learned about in school. It's just a manual that's used to help assess various conditions and various illnesses, and a lot of it is around mental health. And they updated it to better reflect mental health rather than calling it a disease or an illness or a problem and not really understanding it. That was when the understanding started to ramp up. To your point earlier when you were saying how this started with, it was prostate cancer, right? So it started with prostate cancer, and then all this funding goes towards it, and then that has improved the, I guess, chances of people surviving with prostate cancer through kind of funding and encouraging people to go and get checked and stuff like that. Mental health needs that too, because it's not very well understood. And so that's what I wanted to open up to all of us, is how has our own experience with mental health changed over the years, and our own understanding with mental health changed over the years. Because if I thought back 10 years ago, when I thought of mental health, it was a very blanket statement. I had no real idea of the repercussions around it. So yeah, I'll open that up to all of you. And how has your own understanding of mental health changed over time?
I would say for myself personally, as a kid growing up, I actually dealt with a lot of depression. And because I've listened to a few of your episodes before, and you've had friends that would open up about some of their insecurities and things that aren't easy to talk about, right? And the thing that's always stuck with me is mental illness, depression, negative thoughts about yourself. It doesn't necessarily have to be rational. And this is the thing, is sometimes it's completely irrational. You look at somebody's objectively, you look at their life. What is there to complain about? But then you can't take away how they feel. And I think that sometimes when we look at somebody's life and we think that, oh, they have so many things to cherish, how could they feel this way? We dismiss that. And I think for the person that's dealing with some of these things, if you're interacting with people that dismiss it, or just pull up your bootstraps, figure it out, deal with it, right? It can kind of just leave them feeling like they're isolated, right? They're in the middle of the ocean and you're not throwing them the buoy or anything to keep them afloat.
Right.
And for me, it never really made sense as a kid growing up until I got much older, and I realized that I just dealt with a lot of negativity in my life, and I really just brought it on myself. Sure, you could be you were bullied or whatever, but a lot of it was self-critical, right? Self-deprecating humor turned into actual self-deprecating thoughts. And that was hurtful for me growing up. And I think it took me a long time, really until I was a young adult, to actually really figure it out and feel comfortable with who I am. And I think for me also, the really thing that pushed me and really made me understand it to a whole nother level, and I won't say exactly who, but there's a very important figure in my life currently that when I became an adult, they shared with me that they were so close to making the ultimate decision where they would remove themselves from my life. And I think about, if I didn't have this person in my life, if they were gone, how different I would have been. And I think, to also Mitch's point, when he mentioned the work that you're doing, at the end of the day, it results in fathers, grandfathers, brothers, uncles being alive because they otherwise wouldn't be, is super impactful. You think about all the people that you think of suicide as obviously someone taking their own life, and right, it just affects them, but it's a cascading effect. There's so many people that are connected to that individual that when somebody is gone, it leaves so many damaging impacts and effects on all those left behind. And like I said too, when something tragic happens, you try to make sense of it. It's why did this happen? But the thing about depression can be that it is completely irrational. There is no real rhyme or reason. You can think about the chemical imbalance, the biology of it, of course, but the actual reason for it doesn't make sense. And I think that's the toughest part about it. So when we talk about it, when we open it up, when we actually support each other and deal and navigate through it, I think that's the most important thing that we could really do.
Yeah, and you touched on some interesting idea there about like growing to understand it, because there's a chemical aspect to it, right? For one thing, and that's one thing that had not been understood for quite some time, and now it's starting to be understood more, and you can start to address this as a real medical approach and trying to help for people who do have depression. But one of the most important things you can do is just talk.
Yeah.
Right. Being able to have these conversations with each other can be so powerful and can save a life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned that if somebody does choose to take their life, that doesn't necessarily alleviate the pain, because that pain kind of gets spread to the other people in that person's life. Right. I know that we've felt that, and it doesn't make any problem go away. Right. It's tough to deal with. I don't know like the best way to talk about this. I get uncomfortable when I talk about it, right? It's not something that I find easy to talk about. But thank you for sharing. Yeah. So in your own case, you've come from a place where you had some thoughts that were, I guess, negative or detrimental, and it took some long time to understand that, because you said you've only recently understood as a young man.
Yeah. I think for me, the part about the fact that this role model in my life, the person that I thought was completely infallible, deals with this as well. And that just made me realize that, we're all human and we all deal with these things regardless of who or what you are. We all feel and can feel the same emotions, right? So that was really eye-opening to me, for sure.
Yeah. Judging a book by its cover, you know what I mean? It's that same kind of idea, right? You can build this perfect image of somebody, and you can look at the life objectively. I think that this happens quite often, right? You say like, oh, but they got a good job, you know what I mean? Like, they're hanging out with all their friends. How could they be upset about their job or their life, right? But you don't see what's actually going on inside sometimes, right? And one of the best ways to get that out is in conversation. Yeah. How about yourself, Cabs?
Yeah, like you said, when our friend passed away in 2016, prior to that, there was no awareness to me. Like, wasn't aware of mental health, like conflicts or stuff I should know about, essentially. But after our friend passed, it became more apparent to me. But ultimately, I think there could always be more done. And like Mitch was saying, in how far they've come compared to the last 10 years, and how they've advanced so far in like just looking at mental health and dealing with it and coming up with more resources. It just seems to me like there can be so much more that can be done. Like we're still on like the tip of the iceberg.
It's like its infancy of understanding.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's my understanding. Like I'm more so looking at the education side, right? It can be like, it's tough, but I think that it can be injected more into education at a younger level or at a younger age. And that could be helpful. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know the details. I'm just kind of throwing.
But I mean, no, like I was thinking about that actually before y'all got here today. It's like when I was in school, if I think back to being in high school, mental health wasn't a thing. You don't talk about mental health.
No, it's
right?
more of like a
go talk to the counselor.
Yeah,
like they'll figure you out.
Man up and just deal with it.
Yeah, and on the podcast, my friend Jesse had been on at one point, and he had shared how he went through this battle with depression in high school, and nobody knew about it. Nobody understood that this was going on, right? And I think so much of that comes from a lack of understanding about it, right? Like you don't know how to approach it. You don't know how to deal with it. You don't know how to manage it. So yeah, I would agree that like education is going to help in our growing understanding of mental health as a whole. Maybe I'll ask just real quick, like when you were in school, this might be, I don't know how old you are, but like this might be a little while back. When you were in school, what did mental health look like to you, like when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, to Kabir's point, you're not taught about it. You're taught, Pythagorean theorem, physical health, sexual health, sort of.
Yeah,
sort of.
Not really.
Barely.
But yeah, mental health, you're not really taught about it, and it's a shame, because obviously we all, just like physical health, there's things you can do to take care of that. Same with our mental health, things we do to be proactive about our mental health, and I think like to that kind of point, the reality is most Canadians and people in general, our mental health literacy, if you will, is super low, super basic in most cases. And I reflect back to when I first started Movember, I didn't really know much about mental health. And the only reason why I do now is because it's literally my job. My understanding of it has come so far. That said, I still have so much that I can do to learn and understand it better for myself and for the people in my life I care about. Like I never really thought about mental health. I thought it was just like someone that's really sick.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is like, you think about how you can take actions positively for your mental health, like talking, like social connections, really important. You know, some of the things like being physically active and taking care of yourself. There's a lot of things you can do to be proactive, but most people don't think about that. Most people don't think about, I'm feeling down this week. That could be my mental health. Maybe a good thing to take care of it would be phone up my friend and chat and talk about like my week, and how when you do that and you catch up, suddenly you feel that weight come off your shoulder, or you go for that run and suddenly you feel better. Like these are the types of tools that we all have in our toolbox, but a lot of people don't know.
We don't know to use it.
Don't know how to use that.
Yeah. Like it takes a lot of self-awareness to start trying to address your own mental health.
Yeah.
Right. And because without understanding, you just think that something's not right. You know, you just think that there's something's off. You can't quite pinpoint it, you know, but you don't feel like as you think you should, you know. For a second, I just want to talk about it's almost like the world's worst wake-up call is realizing that you need to check up on mental health and start to understand it more in your own life. For us, it was both that same year, right? And I hate that is the reason why I got into mental health. You know what I mean?
It seems like the people become aware of it when something goes wrong.
It's such a reactive approach to understanding mental health sometimes.
When it should be something like ongoing, like a lifestyle, like routine.
And I guess that comes back to the education part, right? The earlier you start to understand this, the better, right? A lot of this audience for the podcast is like generally younger, right? And so when we get people reaching out to us or like giving feedback, they're usually a younger person, and it's like you realize the impact that having these conversations can have, because someone who hasn't and hopefully will never have to have that wake-up call might hear this and then start to think about it themselves and start to understand their own mental health better earlier on before it's too late in some cases. You know. One quote from Movember that I love was, "Men are dying too young, we can't afford to be silent." That's one of the big quotes on the website if you go to movember.com. Yeah, there you go.
Nailed it.
You go to Movember.com, you see that quote there. What does that quote mean to all of you? Because along with that quote, there is a statistic, which is that of all of the suicides in Canada, 75% are from men, and it is the second leading cause of death between men aged 15 to 44, which is insane to me. That is horrifying, the idea that most of these men that are dying that young, there's a high chance that that's because of suicide. So hearing that quote, hearing that statistic, what do y'all think about that idea that men should not be silent?
It's hard to wrap your head around that fact. Like that statistic.
It's a huge number. It doesn't make sense to me.
75%. When you look at the population roughly, it's an even split.
Men and women.
I don't know.
But whatever it is. Men and women in Canada.
Men and women, right?
The
When you just look at like the binary sex of it, right?
Sure.
It's roughly about half and half. Let's just say for comparison's sake, half and half. The fact that 75% leans on one way over the other indicates that there's an issue. There's a problem, right? And obviously suicide in of itself is a huge issue, right? The act of essentially taking away your life for whatever reason it might be. It could be a physical ailment, it could be mental ailment, it could be something, etc. But it's so tragic when you hear about that, right? We are just brought into this place in a 1 in a million, 1 in a billion shot, and we are who we are. And as far as we all know, we only have this one time and space, and then we take it away from ourselves. And then just to hear that it's mainly men still. Movember started about the cancers, right? Prostate cancer being equivalent to like the breast cancer, but expanding to what could actually be a bigger potential problem, especially for younger men, mental health. And just focusing on why is mental health such a detriment to men,
or like why is it like danced around?
Yeah,
does that make sense? Like, because I feel like because men don't approach it, men don't talk about how we're feeling, that's what leads to this problem. And I think that's why that quote makes sense to me, which is that
the silence part
is the part that I kind of latch on to. You make a face, but I'm wondering, like, what?
No.
It's just the mustache.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not me making faces. Yeah, I'll say those stats are, pretty shocking for a lot of people. Suicide is the number one, gender disparity cause of death in the world. 75% of suicides are by men. And, that's not to not acknowledge that obviously women have their challenges as well, and die by suicide as well, of course. But 75% of all suicides are by men. So it's a big issue, and that's why Movember wanted to take action on it. And explaining, why men take their lives. It's like 3 times the rate of women. It's hard. It's complex. One big thing we know is that men do burden under this idea we need to be that like stoic, strong guy to like never ask for help, be self-reliant, be that strong guy. And it's ingrained in us like from a very young age.
Yeah.
We
It's still around too.
It is.
It's still happening.
Yeah.
Too.
So we actually did a study in 2019 and surveyed 1,000 Canadian men, and I think it was 58% said they society expects them to be always strong and to show no weakness. And I think there was another stat in there that said, I think it was 38% of Canadian men said they will not talk to others about how they feel to avoid feeling unmanly.
Man.
And so like this is like, you say you can't actually talk about men's mental health without talking about masculinity. And when you hear those stats, you start to see how like intertwined they really are.
Yeah.
Because, it's raised in us from a young age, from the cartoons we watch to the sports stars we idolize. And then so from young boys, from the playground to the sports field to the boardroom, we're raised from boys into men that actually see showing emotions as unmanly, talking about how we feel as somehow a weakness. And we really suffer in silence as a result when we go through this. When we go through any challenge in life, we don't open up and we don't know how to talk. And so this mentality is something that we're really trying to flip the script on, because it's literally killing us.
Yeah.
And that's what Movember's trying to do. Use these cheeky, terrible mustaches that we're all rocking to shine a light on a really serious issue. And make sure guys know, part of being strong and tough is having that courage to ask for help when you need it.
Mustache is optional.
Mustache is optional.
Yeah. Yes. We've talked about it a few times before on the podcast about how a lot of stuff starts when you're younger, right? And the same idea, I guess, that this need to be masculine and not show emotion. I guess it's not even masculine. It's the need to be stereotypically masculine and not show emotion is ingrained when we're very young, right? I'm thinking of like whenever you were a kid, like a young boy, right? Like even if you fall and get hurt, don't cry. You can't cry about that. Like if physical pain was even like told like, no, you can't show emotion around that. So then when it came to something that's invisible, of course you can't cry about that. Why are you upset? Why are you crying? Like that would be kind of the response that most kids are often met with, right? You jokingly talked about like crying after like a basketball game, like a rough basketball game on a previous episode in front of your dad. Yeah. Right. But that was like one of the only times where you might cry in front of your dad. Yeah. Right, which is
it just felt normal for me. Like if I felt emotional, I would hold back intentionally, and then that just felt like the right thing to do, which is I mean, looking back at it now at this age, it's just not.
It sucks. Like I don't want to have to hold that shit in, man. Like I don't want to have to not show my feelings,
Well, I played sports growing up too. As a kid, I played soccer all the time, right? And I think even like when you take that example, I'm assuming you lost. Did you lose or did you win?
Many games were played.
But let's say, for example, right? Like it's a huge championship game. Everything's riding on the line. It comes down to the buzzer, and then you lose, right? That's such raw emotion. Like you invested so much of yourself into it, and you're so disappointed. Why is it wrong to just be able to have that moment of frustration or just genuine like defeat, right? Yeah. And then to come at somebody being like, oh, you're too emotional. Like it's just a basketball game or it's just a soccer game. Those are real feelings, right? And I know that we talked a lot about masculinity and what it means to be a man. And you've brought this up in the podcast as well. It's almost like a very archaic stereotype. And then the moment we don't match that stereotype, we failed. And then we let this failure gnaw into us. And then much like Mitch said, we take that, we burn that on ourselves and we sit in silence. And then some people just can't take it. And that's where we run into huge issues. Yeah. Yeah.
There's, we talked about it with our friends Megan and Tasha about reaching almost like a boiling point. The longer you leave something unchecked and you don't address it, the worse it gets. I remember the year that our friend had passed away. I didn't cry about it for some time. I left it for a while. And what got me to the point where like I was living in another place. I was living with my roommate, still same roommate at the time, Evan, and then our other friend Brandon, but a different house. And I remember I biked home from work that day, and I stopped in front of the house. I didn't go inside. Something about that day was just like hitting me different. It had like the weight had finally reached a point where I'm done with this. And I just sat there and I cried. I didn't go inside the house. I didn't step in. We had a chair out front, like this shitty little like beach chair thing out front of the house. And I just sat there and I just cried. The reason for me was I was seeing my closest friend, Sebastian, really struggling with it. And so I was so sad about what he was going through. And it was like watching all these other people in my life that are now dealing with this huge burden. That was a burden unto myself because I wasn't talking about it with anybody. We still rarely do talk about it, to be honest. Like we don't bring this up very often because it's a difficult thing to talk about too, right? When you lose somebody in your life to suicide, it's part of the stigma around mental health tells you not to talk about this too. It makes it hard to have these conversations, and it's just really difficult, and it's so frustrating, man. I don't know if y'all relate to that at all, but it's like you don't want to approach it because you don't want to risk making your fellow man unhappy either. You know what I mean? I didn't want to bring up these emotions in my best friend, so I didn't talk about it with my best friend.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I didn't actually think about it till just now. But after our friend passed away, I wasn't talking about it with anyone really. I just mentioned it to my family, and just asked if you're okay and everything. But I didn't cry until the next time I was with my girlfriend, actually. So I guess I'm just realizing now that was the only person I felt like I'd be vulnerable with.
I wish that we could be more vulnerable with each other. You know what I mean? That men could be more vulnerable with each other all the time, because then you don't have to depend on someone else. Right. And I think this maybe relates to what we're talking about, where men don't have people to talk to. You talked about social connection being so important. If you don't have a social connection where you feel you can be vulnerable, you never get a chance to let this stuff out. Right. You never get a chance to get this stuff off your chest. You don't have a person to talk to, which is, I think, is so dangerous.
Yeah. So I would say from Movember and studies, we know, men typically start to lose close or strong social connections once they hit the age about 30. So when you're in university, you got a lot of close buddies. But 30, think about it, your work, maybe family, maybe start having kids, maybe your best friend moves away or you move away, and suddenly you're starting to lose these strong social connections as life goes on. It just happens. And we know that we did a survey, I think a quarter of Canadian men reported that they don't have that person that they would feel willing to reach out to and have this kind of conversation if they're like really struggling, which is really concerning, because if you don't have that person, that means you have no one to talk to, no one to be vulnerable with. So that's like, it's a big message for Movember we're trying to push, is men like make that time to stay socially connected with, like, to make sure you're booking that annual guys trip, or like pick up that phone and phone that buddy that moved away, because guys are so bad. Like a friend will leave and we're like, oh, it's been like 18 months I haven't talked to him. Like you hung out with him all the time, and so then he moves, and see you later. Like
the convenience is gone, and you're no longer so accessible.
But yeah, it is really super important to keep that close social connection. And it is sometimes, I think, hard to, if you're not used to being vulnerable. I think a lot of you guys seem like you're pretty willing to talk about your feelings and open up, but most guys aren't. Like it's just it's not the case.
That's just the reality. Yeah.
And so creating an environment where people feel safe to open up can be a challenge sometimes. At Movember, we have this acronym. It's called ALEC. And it stands for Ask, Listen, Encourage, Action, and Check In. So if you have someone that's going through a tough time, we encourage them to use this kind of framework. And I think the cool part about the Ask one, that getting someone to start opening up, you'd be like, hey, how you doing? I've been worried about you. You'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. Like they brush you off, right? And so I think, a good tip there for people is we encourage you to model honest conversation, is what we say. So it's a bit of a hack, a bit of a trick. So if you show vulnerability first, it's actually like a psychological thing. They'll feel like they should reciprocate.
Interesting.
So I can say, man, like I'm going through a really tough time. Like I've got the kids at home, got my partner. I feel like I'm dropping the ball at work and this and that. And it's just been really struggling. How about you? I've been worried about you. I know you lost your job 6 weeks ago. I've been thinking about you. So suddenly, like in that scenario, I've, created a safe space,
right,
where they're more likely to open up. you know, stuff like that. And we also know like a lot of guys, if you get out, like they're more likely to have conversation shoulder to shoulder. So like go for a walk or like have a beer at a bar, like something that can kind of like be a more comfortable scenario for guys can go a long way. So those are some tips, and I'll just toss it out there a little promo.
Please.
Movember funded a really cool tool. It's called Movember Conversations. And
I think I checked that one out. Okay. That was one of the ones that I went through.
Yeah, so you go to conversations.movember.com. You can go check it out, and basically it's an online tool that upskills you on how to support other people in your life that you think might be struggling. It kind of trains you on how to have those conversations using that ALEC framework, and you kind of practice. You go through
it walks you through like different
like scenarios. So I think there's one like, you know, job loss, if you have a friend that did that, or someone that, you know, feels just like a little distant or whatever. There's a couple different scenarios. It's a really great resource, really easy to go through. It also has a bunch of articles on like how to support a friend, you know, going through different stuff. So encourage people to go check that out.
So a resource like that, for example, and I'll ask you maybe about like other things that Movember has funded. What would someone do when they don't have that social connection? You know what I mean? Like when, let's say you did have it, you hit 30 or 30 plus, and then you lose a social connection. What can men do to rebuild that? Is there anything that has sort of like stood out in your time with Movember where it's like, this is like a really good tool to rely on, or a really good space to go for men to find that kind of connection again?
You know, like to build friendships, you mean?
Yeah. Like this is a weird question, I guess. Now that I ask it, it's like, well, how do you make a friend? But that's the thing, right? Is like men do get stuck in these places where they
it's
don't.
true. And I'll be honest, so I moved to Vancouver about 3 years ago, and my best friend was here, which was great. And but he had a girlfriend, and he was, you know, always going to her place on the weekends. And I remember the first few weeks I was here, it'd be a Friday night, another Friday night, home alone. I'd be like, cool.
Yeah.
And like there was moments for probably the first time in my life that I felt like lonely. Like I was like, like I could just like feel it. And it's tough. And it was, you know, eventually, you know, you start to meet more people, and slowly you make some friends. Vancouver's not always the easiest place to make friends.
No, it's not.
I hate that we all laugh at that.
I think it's hard, but I think it's making it a priority.
Yeah.
And if, you know, part of it is like that awareness and education of how important it is for you. And so I knew for me it was a priority. So I made sure I was like making that extra effort whenever there was. So I'm like, I think this person could be my friend. Like, try to get in there, you know? I don't think there's a silver bullet for that one, but
but I get your point there, I guess, of the education and understanding how important social connection is the foundation to that decision to look out and start looking for connection again, right? Because I feel like if you got to a place where you lost that connection, but you just didn't know what to do about it, that is what would stop you from reaching out. Because I think it's an interesting hurdle to have to get over, to put yourself in a position where you're starting to meet more people. Because that's another thing that personally I would be intimidated by. I would imagine I would be intimidated by. If I get to 30 and I'm now losing all my friends, I'm not looking forward to having to go make new ones, right? We've talked about it plenty on the podcast, how thankful I am for the friend group that I have. And hopefully I don't have to lose that at any point. Hopefully I've got at least some of them there. But if I did, I would imagine it's a very big step to put yourself out there again and start making friends at 30 plus. You know what I mean? Like to me, that's scary. I'm not there, but like to me, that's scary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know why.
Well, don't worry. I'm not saying like you hit your 30th.
And now I'm screwed. Yeah, like now I'm
unfriending you on Instagram or something.
Yeah, you got to prepare for that day.
It's just, you know, a general kind of stat that kind of starts to happen.
But it's that self-awareness of knowing that connection is so important, right? And that's the part to try and maintain, I guess, right?
It is kind of happening slowly. Sorry.
No. Yeah.
But it is kind of happening slowly. You're seeing our friends getting married, having kids. Some moving away. Jesse moved to Langley.
I don't see him.
Yeah, I don't see him either. So
ridiculous.
It is slowly happening.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's good for you to know about yourself. But then if it's Jesse, like you think about his mental health, like making sure you're taking that time to reach out to him. And if he's a dad, we know a lot of dads can like struggle in that. If he's a first time dad too, it can be a joyful time having a kid for sure, but it can be super stressful and change your identity. Less sleep, you know, you don't get to hang out with your buddies as much, you know. So it's a time for, you know, us friends to recognize these times of transition in life, whether it's becoming a dad or going through divorce or relationship breakdown or retirement. Like these are times when men are more likely to, you know, struggle with their mental health. And so it's times for like, we all have a responsibility to know that.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll get there with educating and that kind of thing. But then seeing a friend that might be going through that and make sure I'm going to give them a call. I'm going to check in. I'm going to make sure we, plan a time to go out and visit them and have a beer or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like what our friends have gone through, and being at a younger age, like we've all gone through breakups. Like that's always been a thing where when a guy's going through a breakup, everybody kind of rallies around him and is there to support. But something like moving away, I've never consciously like thought of that as being a potential issue, especially if the person did struggle with mental health, right? The idea that now they're disconnected from their friend group, it's never been a thought in my head like, oh, like maybe we should be like more consciously checking in and like trying to engage with this person, and just for the sake of like maintaining that connection for them, right? I know that, like, to talk about dads for a second, I have a friend that recently became a dad. It's his second kid, but you can't connect with a kid. Can't connect with a newborn, right? So if all your time is now spent with this child, and you lose that time where you're going out with your friends at the end of the night or whatever, or the weekend, you lose that connection time. I can understand how then very quickly that social connection starts to disappear. I've never thought about these things as reasons for connection to stop. In my head, it's just always been like a physical stopper. They leave the country or they move to another province. That's when you stop connection. But these little changes in your lifestyle can affect that too. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing about there's no silver bullet to addressing a loss of connection, but it is the importance of understanding that you need to have connection. And when you start to feel that you're losing it, then you should act on it, I guess.
Yeah. And I think so. Those are times we know that guys can struggle. It is. I think another important topic to raise perhaps is also recognizing the signs that someone is struggling and knowing what to look for. Because, when we look at physical illnesses, we know what to look for. Like if a woman feels a lump in her breast, she goes to the doctor to get some mammogram. If we know the physical manifestations of a stroke, for example, everyone knows that. And there's TV ads about it. When it comes to mental health or suicide ideation, like it's less clear. A lot of people don't know as much. And we know for men, it shows up a lot differently. When you think of depression or struggling, most people might think of like somebody sad laying on the couch eating a tub of ice cream. Right. That's typically what's portrayed in movies or whatever.
As Hollywood has you.
Right. But that's not going to happen. I mean, you read the stats earlier. It was kind of like 38% of guys said they will not talk to others about how they feel to avoid feeling unmanly. So if guys aren't going to share how they feel, how are you ever going to know? And so that can often show up in other ways, some not the best ways, like drinking alcohol more. So a buddy maybe goes through a breakup, he's suddenly hitting the bars more, and we'll be, he's okay. He's just like, dealing with the breakup. Yeah. Actually, it's not the most healthy way to deal with it, and it could drift into something else, or it could be, working more, becoming a little more aggressive, or isolating themselves. And so sometimes changes in behavior will just discount as like, they're just doing their thing. But actually it could be a sign of something deeper. Right. And so these are the, being able to pick up on some of these signs can be really important to identify and be like, okay, now it's time to reach out and check in how they're doing. Because we know a lot of guys are willing to open up actually if you talk to them, but most people don't ask. And so being able to recognize those signs are really important.
Right. And then you lean into that ALEC framework. And you said that was ask, listen, encourage connection, and check in. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. I think that's a good approach to dealing with it.
What I also like to bring it up to the point where people feel more encouraged to open up when you actually start and be vulnerable with them first, right? Creating a comfortable environment where you're lowering your guard, giving them, psychologically speaking, like the A-OK to be like, okay, I can kind of get where this guy's coming from. I too also, and I can share, right?
Yeah.
It's weird how men are like that, man. Like it takes somebody else being vulnerable for you to decide that you can. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Who's going to do it first?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Huh? You're going to stalemate the whole time. Like, you're just going to both stand there and be upset.
Yeah.
There was one more quote from the Movember website that I wanted to read for us here. Last one there is, be a man of more words. That's also on Movember's website, Movember.com. We've kind of talked about it this whole time in this conversation, the importance of connection and speaking and opening up with each other. In your own experiences, why has opening up or being vocal, being someone of more words helped you, or has it helped you in situations where you were going through something tougher?
For myself, just speaking completely from my own personal perspective,
Mm-hmm.
when I go through the bouts of like my lows, because life is peaks and valleys, right? But when I go through my bouts of my lows and I don't open up and I don't talk to anyone about it, I drag myself further down because I have no other input other than whatever I'm thinking of in that moment. Well, I feel like when you get over that hurdle, because I'm much like the same where I love to help people, I hate asking for help. Right?
Yeah.
It's just this, it's this weird contradiction where I love to help somebody if you need help, but I hate asking because I feel like
I feel that, yeah.
I failed, like, or I feel like I'm not good enough, right? And when you're sitting on something and your only partner to deal with it is you and yourself, sometimes it makes it a lot worse before it gets better. Versus if you actually open up and speak with a friend, a family member, it could even be completely unbiased, like maybe a counselor or a mediator or something of that nature. And they're able to listen and maybe just give a different perspective or at least just even understanding so you can actually vent it out or air it out. It doesn't sound right once you say it outside, like out loud. It's stupid is what I've come up with. Like when I feel really bad and I say it out loud, I'm like, well, that's really dumb. And then it completely like flips a switch in my head where I was just like, okay, I feel a little bit better. Or if something feels really bad, I say it sounds even worse. But then a friend or a family member be like, hey, that is really tough. I've gone through something similar. Or it could just be like, yeah, that is really tough. I can't even imagine what that feels like. But just that input, that actual input for somebody else other than myself helps in the end when I think about it. Like I hate in the moment because again, I'm asking for somebody's ear or I'm asking for their help. But then I walk away like maybe a day, two, a week later, it helped.
Yeah, and it's like you're not alone then once you've asked.
Yeah.
Right? I find it funny that you say that, like, oh, you think of your own issue, and once you say it out loud, it's like, oh, that's dumb.
Yeah.
But that's in a way, it's like dismissing that feeling too. And I think that sometimes, in my own experience, has been part of the problem for me, is that I do think of a problem and think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Someone else has it worse. That's another thing I do all the time, is I kind of make it like, okay, my problem is not as bad as somebody else's out there. I shouldn't be upset about it. I'm allowed to be upset about whatever I want to be upset about, right?
Yeah.
And as long as you're getting that out there, then you start to feel better about it. But I find that funny that you just, oh, like this is a stupid thing to be upset about. But nothing's a stupid thing to be upset about. You know, if you're upset, you're upset.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's subjective, right? Like, yeah, you could say like somebody losing, let's say for example, like I wear this necklace and it's from my dog, right? He was my best friend for a long time. And yeah, like when he passed away, that was devastating to me because he was part of my life for 13 years versus somebody that maybe loses a friend or a family member. Yeah, you could say that, you know, this is a person versus an animal. But for me, like this was, and I obviously will say like, yes, of course, losing somebody, anybody that's important in your life sucks. But you can't necessarily go to someone and be like, dude, you just lost a dog, right? Like I lost X and X, right? And this comparing and contrasting, somebody has it so much worse than me, but it's all subjective to the actual person itself, right? Pain is pain, feeling is feeling. It could, the catalyst or the cause can be different, but you still feel those same things. So just making sure that you're building an environment where you're not necessarily just super dismissive. Again, because you want to encourage people to have these conversations, right?
Yeah.
And it's not really encouraging when it's like, bro, it's just an animal. Who
Like,
cares?
we'll get over it.
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it, this is why I started the podcast, you know what I mean, is to be able to talk about things that are on my mind and just get stuff out there on a regular basis. And this has been such a huge help for me over the course of this year so far, is having a place where I know about once a week I can come. And if I had something on my mind, I'll talk about it. Right. So I, for myself, have just been lucky enough to have found this place, you know, and I hope that you get to experience some of that too. You have a place where you can be open if you want to. But yeah, it's important to talk. I think there's such value in talking, whether it's with a counselor. I've talked about getting counseling, right? Like that is my unbiased person to go to if I had something that I need to talk about that I'm not sure if I want to be vulnerable with a person. I could just go to them, right? Yeah. So I'm lucky enough to have that resource. Again, not everybody does get these opportunities or have these people in their lives to talk to, but speaking is it's something you can take for granted. It's so easy to do. You can just talk, but at the same time, it's so hard to do. It's so hard to get someone out, you know? Yeah.
Easier said than done, right?
Easier said than done sometimes.
100%.
Yeah.
Funny.
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
I guess, you know, when it comes to be a man of more words, you know, I think it's for ourselves to, you know, recognize it's good to talk about our shit. You know, we all struggle. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, what car you drive or whatever, like we all struggle. And so recognizing that is important. But I think, you know, for me, more and more over the past few years, be a more man of more words is also, how I can play a role in supporting others as well. And like looking out, kind of like what we're talking about earlier, you know, asking that question, looking for the signs, and being there to support people. And actually, like sometimes doing it, I phoned a buddy last night because I was like, I'm not sure. And it turns out he was fine. He was just like, I'm driving home with my wife. I had a great night. Like, I'm like, cool. Like, well, I'll see you next week. And sometimes that's the case, you know, but sometimes, you know, a lot of people don't have, you know, somebody in their life that they're willing to open up and be vulnerable with. And so if you can hold that space and like show empathy and with no judgment, just be there. You don't need to fix them or solve the problem or have any answers. Just like listen.
Just listening. Yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, big for me. I think over the past few years, I've been trying to do a lot more of that. And also I've been going to see a counselor and like that kind of thing for my mental health too. But yeah,
it helps a lot. Right?
It does.
Yeah. Do you relate at all, either of you two, to what Devin was saying about how you can often find it easier to try and help out other people rather than yourself?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's I forget the numbers now, but we did a study on that as well. And like, it's crazy. Like the numbers, it's like 30% of guys don't want to ask for help, but 70% would say they would be there to 100%. Support others.
Yeah.
And I think, so just know that is a universal, like kind of feeling. And so if that's how you feel, like, all your buddies would feel the same thing. So like they want to actually be there to support you. You just got to remember that.
Yeah, it sounds like the only issue there is getting the conversation started. Because everyone's willing. It seems like all the parties are willing.
That's the thing. It's like, it's so hard to just be the first one to say something. Well, or it can be hard sometimes.
And I think this is the problem also with guys. Because guys are great. You know, no drama normally with guys. We have a great time. Like, girls sometimes have drama. Guys don't typically. But we typically talk about, you know, like just bullshit. We'll talk about cars. We'll talk about the game last night. We'll talk about sports, you know, whatever. Yeah. But oftentimes it's like, you know, how are you doing with that breakup? Or like, how are you doing with that? I know you've been like stressing about this job you haven't been happy with. Like, how are you doing with that? And like cutting past the fluff sometimes. And it's just, you know, who's going to be that person to kind of take the lead and dive in a little bit, or maybe show a little vulnerability first, and then you can kind of create a space, hopefully. But
it's unfortunate because I noticed when, again, just realizing now with the conversation we're only having with our friend group, we're having these conversations once in a while, but alcohol is usually the starting factor for that.
Which I also like. I think it's like a terrible thing. Like that
if
moderation.
You can bring up the conversation, it tends
to be where guys when guys do connect. Hopefully it's like after 1, not after like 8. You know. But yeah, like meeting up on a Tuesday night to have a beer and catch up and having a conversation. Good. Maybe not at 2 a.m. at a club downtown. But,
you never know. Better places than that, I guess. I kind of want to take what you said there about just being there to listen and checking in for the sake of checking in. Just do it. That's a message I want to leave with the audience at the end of the episode here is, if there's a man in your life that you care about, if there's a man in your life that you haven't talked to in a while, take today as a reminder to reach out and just send a text. Hey, thinking about you. How you doing? Right? Just throw that out there and don't stop at the fine response that you're going to get, which is, oh yeah, I'm good. Go deeper than that. Try and get a little further with that conversation and like genuinely have a moment to open up with them. Right? Yeah. I wanted to end off there if that's all right with y'all. Mitch, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out and talk to us about Movember, plug everything. Dev, thank you as well for coming down today.
I grew a mustache for today.
Absolutely. Overnight. It's like a chia pet. Even better.
Yeah.
No.
It's like those Play-Doh dudes where you just like squish it.
You push it out. Yeah. This month on Your Mental, every episode this month is going to be talking about something related to Movember. And we're going to be, again, fundraising this year. We'll have a link in our description to donate if you're interested. It's a great cause. Lots of good stuff comes out of Movember. And it's worth taking the time to look into it and check in on your men. Thank you all, everybody. And I will see you all next week with another episode. Peace.